Senator, Republican Brian Hughes. Senator, thank you for the time this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You say this bill is necessary because it, in your words, makes it harder to cheat. But after 22,000 hours of digging, the Texas Attorney General, Republican Ken Paxton, who endorsed you, didn't find a single case of voter fraud in your entire county in 2020. So why did you even write this bill?
I can tell you about an ongoing investigation today in my district in East Texas arising from the 2018 election cycle. And we have criminal indictments there against the county commissioner and a number of other folks in the community. And it's based on mail ballot fraud. If you look at the cases of ballot fraud around the country, mail ballots tend to be where most of the problems lie. This is not a new problem. In 2017, Texas passed Senate Bill 5. It was a mail ballot security bill passed with bipartisan support. In 2019, I filed Senate Bill 9 last session. It passed the Senate, didn't make it through the House. Just like every other area of the law, when we see problems, we try to improve them so the system works better for everyone. And that's what this is about.
Just to be clear, you're not disputing the fact that, again, the Republican Attorney General in Texas didn't find a single count of voter fraud in your county. In fact, he only found 16 minor cases across the entire state. You say that this bill makes it easier to vote. Those are your words. But it strains credulity because it limits voting hours early from 24 hours to 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. maximum. It totally bans ballot drop boxes, and it also completely bans drive-by voting. How does that make it easier to vote?
The bill says if you are in line to vote and the polls close, you must be allowed to vote. That wasn't clear before. If you're in line to vote, you will be allowed to vote.
Hold on. It's been clear since 1986. I went back and I read... It is part of Texas state election code since 1986. This has been codified.
It has not been clear that it applies to. It's not been clear for early voting and election day. This makes it clear it applies to early voting, not just election day. You're referring to election day. As you know, more and more people vote early. This bill clarifies it for early
It was never
voting.
banned before, but that's not the question I asked you. I asked you, how does it make it easier to vote, to ban people from using a drop box, from driving up to vote, and also cutting the hours they can vote early in half? How does that make it easier for folks to vote?
Drive-through voting has never been allowed in Texas. It's not in the election code. We had one county in one election last year tried, and you know what we learned based on testimony? We learned that there weren't poll watchers present to see if the law was being followed. We also learned that now the numbers weren't recorded accurately, and there was testimony that inside a car with multiple people, ballot machines being passed around, there's no secret ballot, there's no security. We want to have a secret ballot that people can trust, and that's why the default rule is to vote in the polling place where we have checks in place.
A secret ballot is fundamental to American democracy. You're right on that front. So then I wonder why your bill gives partisan poll watchers the right to video record people who are seeking assistance in trying to vote. That could mean people who are struggling with the English language and need clarification on something, people who are disabled and need help clarifying something. They can actually be video recorded now by poll watchers in your state. Why?
The poll watchers are there to watch the process. They're the eyes and ears of the public. They're from Republican Party, Democratic Party. Each candidate can have poll watchers there. That's nothing new. And the poll watchers are there to make sure the rules are followed. The only time that they could be allowed to watch a voter is if there's assistance going on and it looks like it might be violating the law. As you know, in Texas, if you have trouble with the language or with reading the ballot, you can have assistance. That's normal. There's nothing illegal about that. What we do have a concern about is folks who are preying upon voters, claiming to be helping them when in fact they're not.
It raises concerns about voter intimidation, that's for sure. Listen, your fellow state senator, your colleague in the state Senate, Royce West of Dallas, who is a black man, pleaded with you about this bill. And here's what he said, quote, "Passage of this bill makes clear that on these issues you have not understood our plight in this country. Do you believe that America has a history of voter suppression of black Americans? And should that history and concern from your fellow Americans, black Americans, not be considered here?"
Of course that's considered, and that's why after the bill was filed, changes were made. After the hearing took place, changes were made at the suggestion of disability rights groups, of voting rights groups. If you want to talk about the history of the Democratic Party and Jim Crow, that's fine. This is about elections in Texas based on our experience to make our system better for everyone.
I read through all the crossouts in the bill, and it does not address and was not change some of the key concerns among black voters there. Let me give you another example from your fellow state senator, Carol Alvarado. She points to analysis from the Harris County Election Board, who found that more than half of the votes that were counted, of 127,000 in the 2020 election in Harris County that were drive-through voting, more than half of them were from black, Latino, or Asian constituents. You say every vote counts, but what about every voter? If you can't get the vote of every voter, how is that not discounting them?
Harris County is a great example. It's the only place where drive-through voting has ever been tried. It was created in one election last year, not provided for in the election code. Look at where those drive-through voting places were allowed. In the largest Republican precinct, there were 2 spots. In the largest Democratic precinct, there were 5 spots. That Republican precinct has more population, more voters, and it's larger, yet it had 2 locations compared to 5 in the Democratic Party. The point is the deck shouldn't be stacked against one party or the other.
My fundamental question is, your colleague in the state Senate said that more than half of the folks in that big district that voted with drive-in voting were minorities, and taking that away is going to hurt them. That's my question, and that's exactly what Royce West is talking about.
If you want to talk about polling places, this bill says they're placed based on where the voters are. What can be more fair than where the voters are located? I don't understand the argument with that. I asked Senator West and Senator Alvarado to give me a better measure than voting population. Neither one could suggest anything. The polling places are for the voters. That's where they should be.
You know that it's also about how they can vote. And banning the ability of different ways, easier ways for them to vote, is the crux of this here. And that's the question I'm asking you. I understand you don't want to answer it, but I guess to circle back to the fundamental question of why. So when you have the former Attorney General Bill Barr, when you have Trump-appointed federal judge after Trump-appointed federal judge, when you have Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, the Texas Secretary of State's office, also a Republican Secretary of State there, Mitch McConnell, all saying there was no widespread voter fraud, why do you even need this?
So you say there's no widespread voter fraud. I hear that from a lot of Democrats. So there's no widespread fraud. How much fraud is acceptable? How much is too much?
16,
Elections ought to be fair. They ought to be safe. They ought to be secure.
State Senator, we have the numbers. 16 minor voting fraud cases across the entire state of Texas. Pretty big state. 16 cases after 22,000 hours of digging. Why is this necessary, especially given all of the concern from your constituents? AARP, it risks disenfranchising older voters. The League of Women Voters, it increases barriers in urban areas to black and Hispanic voters and voters with disabilities. Why do you need this?
I'm not sure what election cycle you're referring to. This bill is based on testimony from prosecutors, from election workers, and let me say, Democratic and Republican elected prosecutors, election workers. This bill is not about 2020. This bill is about cleaning up the Texas process. In 2017, we passed an election fraud reform bill with bipartisan support. 2019, I filed Senate Bill 9. It passed the Senate. I realize there's a desire to drag us into this national conversation.
No.
This bill is about Texas, making our processes better in Texas. This is not about the 2020 election cycle.
Okay, we have to leave it there, but this is about clarifying for people in your state who have and should have a fundamental right to cast their ballot. That's what this is about. It's not about a national conversation. We welcome you back, State Senator Brian Hughes. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.